Welcome back on this Tuesday, August 31st. It's the final day of the month. Our time just about 6 minutes before 8 o'clock in St. Lucia and across the Eastern Caribbean. My very special guest is already online. I won't keep him waited. Connected via the video platform, former Prime Minister, Leader of the Opposition, Member of Parliament for Miku South, the Honorable Alan Chastanet joins me now via the platform. Good morning. Thanks for waking up early and agreeing to come on today.
Always great to be with you, Shannon.
Nice to have you, and thanks for your time. Sadly, we're connecting at a time when St. Lucia is bleeding. Another mother is crying again this morning because of a homicide in La Croix. Your reactions, 63 homicides and counting. Scary.
Yeah, it's certainly not a statistic that you want to brag about. And a statistic that, as I had said before, has put a substantial amount of fear into the lives of people here in St. Lucia. But, first of all, I don't want this to ever get to the point where it becomes a statistic. Sadly, we've seen 4 young people lose their lives in the last week. They have families, they have friends. And in many ways, we're very similar to you and I, may have some different values or a different lifestyle, but we're all human beings at the end of the day. So my deepest sympathies, first of all, to the family, to the community, their friends, and really want to just continue to support the government and in particular the police, social workers, and everybody who I know have worked very hard to try to resolve this issue. So again, as an opposition, we don't look to make any kind of political mileage on this situation. Sadly, anytime you give any commentary, some people want to interpret it as being political. It's not. It's really coming from a place of concern. Being a former prime minister and being involved in the fight against crime, I know how difficult of a task that it is. And, sadly, Shannon, it's a holistic approach. There is no one magic wand that you can solve. And there's a multiple of things that you have to tackle. And so our criticism of this government is that you wanted the job. You said you were ready from day one. And clearly all the evidence to the contrary that you were ready. And we're all paying that price for their incompetence. And at this point, we have to say it is incompetence and it's an inconsistency. It's very important that if you're going to be a leader of this country, that people believe in you, that there's some level of credibility. Clearly, that every political leader around the world, St. Lucia is no exception, is going to be criticized. But the integrity and ethical characteristics that are required has been sorely lacking in this government. I think it's fair for me to say that. You cannot have a double standard and expect that there's going to be a response. So leadership requires bringing people together. It means that you have to be in a position to gain that level of confidence. And this government clearly has failed miserably. And we are in serious trouble when it comes to crime in this country.
I want to get your reaction in just a bit to the Prime Minister's latest response to the crime situation, but in support to the state's efforts to suppress what's happening and in support of a better St. Lucia, you are resubmitting your proposals and recommendations as an opposition to deal with crime. What in the main is the core substance of those recommendations?
I think really the biggest one is that the experience that we gained from COVID, Shannon, and the implementation of a central command. One of the problems that governments suffer around the world is a lack of coordination. When I go back to September 11th, 2001, when we had 9/11, the report immediately coming afterwards said that, they didn't stand a chance in preventing it from happening because of the lack of coordination between so many different ministries. So the COVID command center went right to the heart of that and put all of the key decision makers. And let me explain to you, social workers, educators who are in the community are the first persons to start identifying problems, because it manifests itself in the day-to-day lives of families. The real solution to crime is prevention. You know, once the crime has taken place, that's a very sad direction that we have to go in. So getting the evidence to convict a person and sending a young person or anybody to prison, I don't think is the first choice of any government. So the command center brings together all of the key players, identifies critical problems, and says we need to get these things resolved now in real time. So you have the Attorney General's office if there's any legislation that's required, the Ministry of Finance in terms of resources, and that all of the key players know what's taking place. Clearly, this is a gang war, and there are a lot of different theories as to what's causing the gang fight, whether it's young people who are uprising within their own ranks and want to take control, and whether the leaders now are fighting back, whether it's just revenge and in terms of territory marking. Very difficult for the average person, any one of us, to make that final determination. But there is a reason. And it's not unless there is an intense investigation, an intelligence search, that we're going to find what the solution to what that problem is. And I think that that's very important at Command Center. Some of the other things that we were working on that sadly government politicized: border control. You know, you cannot start seizing guns here without knowing that you can stop the slowdown of guns from coming in. I mean, that's just simple ABCs. And the current system that we have to prevent guns from coming in has not worked. So the border control is about separating the law enforcement aspect of customs and the revenue collection of customs. Getting scanners at the port of entry. You know, it's a shame, and it's very obvious what is taking place. That every single time that government invests in any technology, there's sabotage. You know, the scanners that we put, Shannon, you would know that at the fast ferry. Within days, somehow water fell on it. Somehow a truck hit it. It's always the same situation. The cost of bringing in scanners for the containers is very expensive, and we have to find a solution to that problem. So that's why canine dogs were brought in. So it was really unbelievable to me that the government, when they came in, got rid of the canine dogs. And to replace those canine dogs right now, it's not a matter of just picking up a phone. There's a lot of time that goes into actually finding the dogs, getting the trainers. And then getting them acclimatized to our St. Lucia situation. So border control is very critical. I'm shocked. Again, you were in the Ministry of Infrastructure, so again, if I'm saying anything that's incorrect, please correct me. The idea of the street lights and then integrating the cameras into the street lights has been on the tables for a couple of years.
Yeah, but we just now got notice that these 24,000 street lights will come on stream 2 years plus later.
Yeah, and included in them are the cameras. And I want your listeners to really appreciate some of the difficulties with governance. So the money was originally coming for the cameras. The company, KLED, was borrowing the money from the World Bank. And because of human rights concerns, they were a pushback by the World Bank to the facial recognition that it was an invasion of people's privacy. But when you reach the crisis that we've had, and when you look at the cost of enforcement, this is a very effective way. So again, if we were putting our own money in or using money from our CIP program, this could have happened much quicker. And you would have thought, honestly, Shannon, that everybody saw what was going to happen and where we are today from a crime perspective. So the delay in implementation on that, and again, it's to advise government. There are going to be persons who are going to try to sabotage this technology, who are going to try to delay its implementation, and it must have a task force at hand to make sure that this thing is being implemented as fast as possible. Um, the other one really is tied into a bigger issue, Shannon, which is the cost of living. And the cost of living combined with the increase in unemployment. It's one thing to say that prices are going up, and then there's another thing to say that people are losing their job.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that it's fair to say that a person like myself or anybody else cannot empathize with a person who has no income coming in with what the cost of living is today. It's difficult. It's almost impossible and frustrating. So again, it's pushing younger persons out of the mainstream economy and into this underworld, because that's the only alternative that they have. So we're actually doing all the recruiting for the gangs for them, because of what has taken place. So the government's plan, whatever that plan is not working when it comes to fighting inflation and generating jobs for people. So that's a critical issue. After school programs. Again, we've built all these sporting facilities. We have the training facility at Grosse Lake, the academy. And we've seen the success that some of our athletes have had. And is to continue to push that program. So there are things and places for young people to go to after school to keep them occupied. So those are really some of the critical things. They're very obvious. They're very basic. They're very boring in many ways, but they are effective. But they require attention and maintenance of it, and that there has to be a war against crime.
Yeah.
And it's about getting everybody else involved in that situation.
Now you've resubmitted, but it's 8 months since you first submitted in December of last year. Prime Minister Pierre then rejected and said, no, it's not new and I can't utilize it. You, in the interest of the nation, you've resubmitted. How optimistic are you that he will take consideration to what you're proposing, engage in discourse? In responding to that part of the question, how hypocritical is it that 8 months ago you sent him those recommendations, 8 months later with 60 plus homicides, he's now throwing his hands up in the air and saying, I don't know what to do and accept recommendations from anybody, when he had those recommendations 8 months and hadn't acted?
Yeah, so really the evidence of the person who's politicizing crime really has been him and his party. In terms of frustration, I'm not frustrated. We will continue to do what we think is the right thing from an opposition perspective. I've really tried to make it a point not to criticize for criticising's sake, and that's why on occasions we have highlighted a concern. One was the inflationary rate, and we also wrote an open letter to the Prime Minister outlining what we thought would be important things for the government to do. That quickly found its way into the garbage can. And then obviously with the crime, you could see that this was escalating. The persons that were being killed, and you knew that there was going to be some kind of retaliation impact. And the government's solution to this problem, which was the Suppression Act, brings up another very important point, Shannon, that I feel very, very, very passionate about. We have a nation state. That's what St. Lucia is, an independent nation. And what allows this nation state to function is a constitution. And let me explain that. Ideally, in a democracy, you would want it where everybody could vote on everything every day. So every single person that's employed in civil service, it would be ideal if every single person can vote on that. Every time we're doing a negotiation, you would love it where every single person could get the documentation and vote on it. But from a practical perspective, that's not possible. So what most democracies have gone to is to developing a constitution, which is a contract. And that contract really says, okay, we're going to empower the government of St. Lucia. And the government of St. Lucia is made up of the politicians as well as the bureaucrats, the civil servants, to make decisions on a daily basis for us. Now, what that does, it creates an institution called the government of St. Lucia, which is much more powerful than any one individual in this country. So what we would not want to do is to give power to an entity that's going to turn around and use that power against any one of us. So the Constitution lays out what are our very important civil rights, because based on the basis of one man, one vote, freedom of movement, freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, and certain liberties that I have. I don't have to be part of the majority. And I cannot be ostracized or I cannot be suppressed in any way by the government. I believe that if I go in front of a court, I'm going to be treated fairly. When I make an application for planning or I send my child to school, that there's not going to be any level of discrimination. So the Constitution lays out those rules that says to the politicians and to the bureaucrats, you can make decisions on my behalf, but none of the decisions that you make can in any way infringe on my individual rights. And I'm not so sure that everybody really understands that. And in the government of St. Lucia, there are checks and balances that are created. So in the case of the parliamentarians, they're really supposed to be policymakers. And so they put together the budget and they also write laws. Parliament really is supposed to be a separate entity, Shannon. But we know it's made up of the same people, and because of the size of our parliament, that's almost virtually impossible to have people who are parliamentarians and not cabinet ministers. Now, the Constitutional Review Committee made a very clear distinction and said that should not be permitted. So the moment that you become a cabinet minister, if you are a parliamentarian, you must resign your parliamentarian position. So we've not really found a way to make that work. So that's the idea behind it. The bureaucrats are hired, and their job is to work for the people, not for the politicians. But you've been in civil service. The persons that promote civil servants are the politicians. The persons that send them on leave or send them on training. The persons that give them pay increases by allowing them to go to a different grade are the politicians. And I think that somehow many of the bureaucrats are too loyal to the politicians and are forgetting about their pledge of loyalty to the people, which is the Constitution. Now, the judicial system is in the middle of that, and the judicial system is supposed to make sure that any laws that Parliament makes or approves, that they're not in any way suppressing people's rights. So I just looked very quickly at the Suppression Act. The Suppression Act is clearly a law that, in my mind, fringes on the Constitution and the people's individual rights. The Constitution says there are occasions in which you are justified as a government to suppress people's individual rights, and that you have to declare a state of emergency. And I want to be very clear. A state of emergency is a process that says if in fact that there is a good reason for you to suppress people's civil liberties, you must first make a declaration to Parliament and debate in Parliament why. And that once you've done that, every single time, let's take the Suppression Act, a police officer searches a person's home, searches a person's car, prevents them from leaving their house for 72 hours, that must be documented. And it must be presented to Parliament on a regular basis. So there is a full documentation and an account of that suppression. Now, if you really understand us as individuals and how strong and powerful our government is, that the people have to be protected, but at the same time, it's a catch-22. You must be protected, but you must also have a strong government to allow government to be able to function. Now, I say all of these things because democracy requires all of us to participate. And I hear too many people becoming overly cynical about the process and think that the solution is just to walk away, not to vote, and just say all the politicians are the same. And, I can say to you, I was in government. I really depended on our deeds speaking for itself. You know what my song is. There's no, right? My song has always been action speaks louder. Okay? And, I want to apologize to everybody because That's not necessarily true. You have to go out and you have to constantly educate everyone, make everybody aware of what you're doing, why you're doing it. When Richard Frederick had his show, I mean, we as a party, me in particular, made a mistake. I didn't think that people would have given Richard Frederick credit, given what his track record is. I was wrong, and I apologize to the people of St. Lucia for that mistake. And I'm learning that you have to maybe slow down sometimes and take a bit more time to explain. And sometimes, you know, I think the appearance is there that we know it all, and therefore we're not listening to people. So I think that whether that's true or not, there are a lot of people who believe that that's true. And we as a party have to figure out how to be able to resolve that problem. How do we get this buy-in that people don't just bundle the United Workers' Party in as being a typical political party that just wants to get in power? So I want to repeat it. I mean, I know that you know this, and I know a lot of the people in my own party know this, Shanon. I'm not doing this to be in power. I'm not. Whether I'm Prime Minister of St. Lucia, in Parliament, is not really my goal in life. My goal is the underachievement of my country. And because of that underachievement, too many people are suffering. But I also must recognize as a person that I may feel very strongly about particular policy positions and issues, but I have to do a better job, and my party has to do a better job of being open to criticism, being open to dialogue, and to recognize that yes, you may see it as an urgent need to do it now, but if the mindsets of the population, the vast majority of the population, are not ready for it, we shouldn't do that. That is not to say that there are persons, what do they say? A wolf disguised in sheep clothing, right? We have that.
Or in blue clothing.
Or in blue clothing. And that exists, right? And I think that we have to do a better job of defending ourselves against those things. We are a political party. We're in an arena in which there are holds barred combat. I don't want anybody to believe that we're not capable of handling ourselves. We are. But I think we just have to be much more careful and mindful of what we say and how we say it. But genuinely speaking, the comments that we're making right now, the recommendations we're making, are coming out of the experience that we've had, what we know that can work and has worked. I think that this government really was elected on a platform of hatred and revenge, particularly by some people, particularly in the Labour Party, and targeted in a lot of instances towards me. But I'm a big boy. I can take care of myself in that regard. But there is no policies. You know, I think the goal was to get into government. And how they're handling crime, we're in trouble. How they're handling the economy and inflation, we're in trouble. How they're handling healthcare, we're in trouble. How they're handling education, we're in trouble. And these are critical cornerstones of the standard of living in this country. So we will continue to make recommendations in a genuine way. We will continue to criticize where we think that criticism is necessary. And I beg for the population's indulgence that yes, sometimes as a political party in opposition, or even just being an alternative political party, we're going to say things to show the comparisons. And that is necessary. And it hopefully the population can accept it as that and discern for themselves which political party genuinely has the interest of the people of this country at heart.
Yeah, I want to thank you for sharing that, because I know a lot of our viewers would appreciate that it has been a lot of reflection from you since the last election, a lot of learning based on what you're saying. So I want to ask you, I know you'd have said you'd have spoken publicly on the making public the investor contracts if and when you next become Prime Minister. I want to ask you about some of the things you do differently then. But my last question on crime to you. I know at this time you sympathize with the men and women, our police officers who wake up every day, still have the limited resources to perform their duties, but they go out, put their lives on the line to safeguard this country. I know you sympathize and with them, especially at this time.
Very much. I mean, and again, I think that it's important that we all appreciate the importance of economic growth. Economic growth is what generates the surplus revenues that allows us to improve the quality of our healthcare system, our education system, and for our police force. We are still running a deficit government, meaning that we have more expenses than we have revenue. That's the reality. So I don't think anybody's deliberately depriving the police of resources. Those are the resources that are available. A couple of cars here and there isn't going to make the fundamental difference. I could tell you the cameras, by having facial recognition, license plate recognition, basic enforcement of smaller infractions, because it's sometimes in addressing a small infraction, you deter bigger issues from taking place. I think that Giuliani used to call it the broken glass theory. So the police sadly have to make do with what they have currently until the economy turns around in a more significant way. We're going to have to depend on outside resources, and that's why the impact story is so important, because the impact story was a situation in where the Western world lost confidence in us and how we were dealing with crime in this country. And when there's any indication that there is collusion between the police officers and the bad guys and the politicians, that raises red flags all over the place. And we're still paying the price for those number of years that we could not get access to training, because we couldn't afford to do that level of training by ourselves. So you're 100% right. And another way of being able to support the police officers, is the prevention by, improving our social systems, improving our sporting programs, improving our education system, stimulating the overall economy to help reduce the crime. That's another way of trying to resolve the problem. And that's where this government, is, in my mind, is misguided. You cannot just attack the after fact of crime to think that you're going to cause it to slow down. It's not going to happen.
I want to flip the coin now and discuss some other matters of national importance. In a few days' time, our children and our teachers will head back into the classroom for a new school year. Firstly, your message to them as they prepare for the classroom.
Yeah, look, I meet a lot of students, and let's not underestimate that kids and also teachers are still suffering from the impact of COVID. And education is so very important. And I'm so proud of the teachers that we have. And even though there are limited resources, I see some teachers really going the extra mile. So I really want to encourage them to continue to do so. I see the seriousness in which some of those teachers take by coming to school a little bit early and decorating their classrooms, in many instances at their own expense. I just also want to remind parents that there is a general rule that the kids that are successful tend on more occasions than not to have a very strong family support behind them. And as difficult as children may be about not wanting to be disciplined and to stay focused at school, it's your job to try to make them do that and to encourage them to be able to do that and show them the importance of an education system. And it's becoming more and more important. And I like the fact that our education system is becoming a little bit more diverse. I would have preferred if the EPADs were still in place, because I think that EPADs are a technology platform that would have helped kids after they graduated from high school, because they would have really been familiar with the technology that's being used in retail and in the service sector and the financial sector, and even in running their own businesses. the greater amount of efficiency you can have in crunching numbers and processing data is very, very important. So this is an important year for everybody to remain focused and continue to work together. And I think that there are many better days ahead for all of us. And it will be made better by the continued dedication that both the teachers and the students have in educating themselves. And I wish them all the best for this new term.
I wanted to ask you on the e-books, because there's a big discussion now. There's a mad rush by parents who are running all around the place looking for CAMDO textbooks, looking for the various textbooks. Your approach was to make those resources available on in soft format on the computers, on e-books. With the one laptop per child program and throwing out the e-books, are we shortchanging our children and teachers on the education sector? Are we shortchanging them?
Yeah, look, if you go back and look at our manifesto in 2016, you'll see that that's exactly what we wanted to do, was to integrate technology into the school system, and to create a platform where books would be on digitally. So if the e-book was exactly that, it was an iPad where you would download all of your school books. 19 school books were downloaded on this thing. And the moment that there was a new edition, the software automatically updated it. Very importantly in this technology, that the links to the internet were only applicable to education. So you couldn't use the link to go and play a game, as an example. And at the end of each chapter in the book, there are links and references. You could link on those and automatically brought you to those reference materials. When the teachers gave students homework, the ePad times how much time a child spends doing that homework. Okay? And also it's submitted on the ePad. And again, now you look at what artificial intelligence is doing, the ability to process and grade those reports is there. And I think very importantly, for instance, if a student is at home and requires extra tutorial training from a teacher, there's a whiteboard option, meaning that the teacher can be on an ePad, the kid is on an ePad, and what the teacher is writing on their ePad is also being recorded. And all of this information, Shannon, was being stored. So if you went in as a parent and you asked the teacher, how are things going with my child, blah, 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 the teacher can show you how much time that she spent with your child. She can show you what work your child has been doing, because it's all documented there. So not only was this a tool, I think, that helped parents in saving them a lot of money. So instead of having to go looking for books every single year for $1,000, these books were automatically downloaded onto the ePad for a license fee of $250 or $300 EC. Forget the fact that we paid for the license fee for the first 3 years. Okay, but if you were moving forward, instead of spending $1,000 and going from store to store to store and determining whether you have the right edition, all of this would be downloaded onto your child's ePad. The ePad was given to the child.
For $250.
$250, yeah, either $250 or $300 was the license fee. I think it was $100 US. $270. The other aspect of this was the administrative. So the teacher, instead of spending as much time grading reports and chasing down children, the ePad was doing that for them. And so they could spend more time actually teaching the child. So let me give you an example. If you gave homework and you came to the class and you just said, hey, Shannon, you did your homework last night, can you give me the answer of this? If in fact you don't give the answer, it means that your parents more than likely or somebody else did the homework for you, which defeats the purpose. But it's easy for the teacher to figure that out. No longer you're looking for the needle in the haystack kind of situation. Now, very importantly is that this is the same technology, Shannon, that when you go to workplace, you're gonna find in your workplace, right? Now, going back to a laptop, which has no books downloaded, gives the child the complete freedom. So which child would not want a laptop?
Yeah.
Okay, what child would not want the laptop that has the freedom to go and play games? And kids today, my children do the same thing. There's a lot of temptation out there, TikTok, etc., that gets their attention. and not necessarily in a productive way. It's not helping teachers. And now the parents are having to go back to buy and look for books for over $1,000 every single year. So it's beyond me how anybody can suggest that the laptops are even comparable to the ebooks. And it's very sad for me that we've taken this step backwards in making our kids globally competitive. Because remember, that's the goal of the United Workers' Party, is to create a globally competitive education system, an education system that allows solutions to compete against foreigners coming here, and for those solutions who decide to go abroad, that their education level is sufficient that they can compete wherever they go in the world.
Yeah, quick response. We have to take a break. The ebook program, one of the first things you will reinstate next time in, based on what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Without a doubt.
Excellent. We're speaking with the former Prime Minister, Leader of the Opposition, Member of Parliament for Miku South, Alan Chastanet. My guest is we must take a break just to refresh on the Zoom, so stay with us. We're going to engage in some of your calls. There's a few more questions on education and other matters of national importance. Stay with us. Our discussion will continue right after this. So because of the nature of our Zoom, we just restart right away. So let's just reconnect.
Here's your guide to installing Hot 7's digital antenna.
Please note that all TV sets manufactured today have a digital tuner. TV sets manufactured before the year 2005 may not have a built-in digital tuner, and you may not be able to receive our free-to-air digital transmission on Channel 7 to receive our free over-the-air digital HD TV service. Number 1. Plug your antenna into your TV set's RF input jack labeled antenna or cable in. Number 2. You will now have to scan for the digital channel. Please note that all digital TVs are different in terms of scanning procedures. The following is a general guide, but the steps or the terminology may be different for your device. Press the menu button on your TV remote. Go to Setup or Settings. Go to Installation or System or Channels. Go to Scan Channels, Program Channels, Auto Scan, Auto Program, or Auto Tuning. Press Select or Enter or OK to start the scan. When the device says scanning is complete, accept the channels found and close the menus.
Get ready for the school party! Kids are on the lookout for the latest trends in school bags, accessories, and much more. School party! Get ready for the new term by joining Hot FM and Hot 7 TV as we present School Party. Hot FM Communications brings you everything back to school with games, shows, including Melee Melage, Unscramble Our Words, Guess the Character, Guess the Movie. We've also got guest speakers and educational programs. It's an interactive program from 11 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. Monday to Friday throughout the month of August. Your principal, Mr. Jordan and friends. With big prizes, let's have fun with Hot FM Communications. Are you ready for school party? Hot 7 TV is the rising star of television in St. Lucia with our stunning 100% HD quality, fresh exciting programming, including a balanced professional newscast. We are now the fastest growing TV station in all time slots on cable. Additionally, over 10,000 households carry our plug and play antennas. Our mobile app has over 11,000 users locally and over 300,000 users worldwide. Keyword to find our free app in the App Store is Caribbean Hot FM. Swipe once for Kiss FM. Swipe twice for Hot 7 TV. It's compatible with Android and Apple handsets. Go ahead, share the app and share the most talked about TV station in St. Lucia. Hot 7 TV, for the viewer and the advertiser. It just makes sense. We watch trending. Hot 7 TV. Catch us on channel 117 Flow, channel 7 Plug and Play, or our website www.caribbeanhot7tv.com and our popular Hot FM app.
To advertise on Hot 7 TV, call us at 452-6040 or email us at hot7@caribbeanhottv.com. A fantastic package awaits you.
Good morning, St. Lucia, with Shanon and Lebourne on Hot 7 TV. WhatsApp from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. Make sure you're locked in. Blessed love. Aye, aye.
And we're back. Thanks for staying with us. Our conversation with the former Prime Minister, Alan Chastanet, continues at this time. Still on education, with a few days to go, so we're seeing repairs still ongoing at a number of institutions here on St. Lucia. Based on the figures that you're seeing in the budget and in the various allocations, is the actions of the government really matching up to what it says is its commitment to education? And I ask you that based on your experience and what you were spending on education when in government.
So, look, the vast majority of the budget of education is salaries. One of the things that we did is we increased the allocation for capital expenditure, the physical improvements of the schools, by $10 million a year. So, this is the first year the government since being in office is actually doing something, and I think they're spending something like $4.5 million. What's even sadder is to show you how badly planned this is that they've left it to so late. So to your point, I mean, I'm getting reports back that a lot of schools, the work hasn't even finished in that regard. So I'm very happy with the program that we started with the Taiwanese in putting the smart boards in, but that needs to be now in all of the schools that we have. And the rationalization of the schools, because as you know, Shanon, birth rate in this country has been on a severe decline for a long time. And we're already seeing it impacting in the primary schools, and we're also seeing it now being impacted on the secondary schools. So the question is, are you going to maintain the same number of schools and just have substantially less students, and you're going to spread your teaching force thin, or are you going to start consolidating in some way with what you're doing? And that's a very difficult decision. We saw when we did that in Miku North, Gail started in her own constituency and took that plunge. We did the same thing, and I think it was in Anse-Lorraine. People didn't react very well to it. People get accustomed to having a school in their backyard, and they want it. But what we do know is that resources are scarce, and consolidating those resources and improving the standard of our schools is better for everyone. So again, that's a great example of where we believe that the evidence suggests that what we were doing is the right thing, but a lot of persons had not bought into that evidence and the necessity to do that. And I think that that's where we have to take some more time in explaining to people what is going on to get their buy-in to make it successful. Because if you're doing what you think is the right thing, but the people have not bought into it, then it's not a win-win situation.
Yeah, a lot of education, a lot of early education is needed. But from what you say, we must get to a place where school repairs and preparation for our children and teachers aren't done so late. It cannot be the norm.
It should start the day after school finishes. And again, we used it also as a stimulus program, so that it created jobs in the communities. So you take my constituency. My constituency has been very accustomed over a period of time where even the benches and the tables are being made by the carpenters, and they know on a regular basis that that's going to happen, and so they can plan for it, and so it creates some jobs and some extra revenue. What we were doing with agriculture, where we said that we were making a commitment, for instance, to the fisheries, that the protein for kids would really be fish, and therefore we would commit to buying X number of dollars of fish per year to be distributed into the school feeding program, and also to be distributed into the healthcare system. Those are ways that you can integrate your activities to give the maximum economic benefit to your country as well.
Excellent. I want to talk some other matters of national importance, and we'll start with the Saudi loan, $75 million. Just about 203 million EC dollars. When you add on the interest over time, it's about $300 million. Do you get a sense of clarity from government? Because for many people looking in, this whole agreement is still shrouded in, I wouldn't say secrecy, but it's still shrouded in a gray cloud, uncertainty. Do you get a sense from the government that there's any real clarity, there's any real focused plan on how this money will be utilized? Because the Prime Minister says it's a 10-year loan which expires in 2028, but we only signed off this year, so that's not good maths. But then he said he meant that the entire project would be completed in 2028. So much is so unsure. Does this worry you any bit?
So first of all, I think it's very important to know that the Saudi Arabians have decided to make a foreign affairs initiative into CARICOM. And so $75 million has been made available to most, if not all, of the CARICOM countries. Yeah. So this is not anything that the government itself went out and it was the beneficiary of very good timing with this. The explanation of the details, I'm really going to leave that to the Prime Minister. I'm not even going to begin to second guess or to understand what he has said, because I think, like a lot of other people, I'm very confused as to what he's trying to say. But I do want to broach it from a different perspective in terms of what they're using the money for. So you spoke about, even though there is a moratorium on the loan payment for principal, and even though it is a very competitive interest payment, you have to pay back the principal, and you're also going to have to pay back the interest. So I think that ideally, the money ought to be going into some kind of productive asset. What do I mean by that? Some kind of asset that's going to generate economic returns in the economy. Now, look, healthcare, I will argue, is an economic beneficiary, because if you can improve the quality of healthcare and the standard of living of people, it should, in essence, generate greater productivity in your work.
Well said.
Okay, so I don't want in any way to say that healthcare is not worthy of that, but is it as tangible? Maybe, for instance, using that money to have built the cruise ship port in Vieux Fort, because that's exactly about how much money it would have been. If you're going to give GPH the cruise ship port in Castries, I have my concerns about that. And you want to improve the quality of the economy in Castries, then move the container port out, which was to be in cul-de-sac. The $75 million happens to be about the kind of money it would take to build that port facility in cul-de-sac. And I think, again, you would have known that. We had a Dutch company that had done all the studies and everything was ready to go to move that project into that different location. The North-South Highway, which is a very important new artery that's required in this country to help with the congestion of traffic and to improve the connection between the north and south of the island. But for this government to want to take now $200 million to invest in an antiquated building, and here's the point. You remember before the elections that the government spoke about horses before hospitals, which I still have no understanding what the connection between those two things were. But more importantly, that the amount of money that we were saying it was going to cost to fix up the old hospital. The preliminary investigations were that it was going to cost in excess of $100 million to have completed what the Labour Party had already started in the old wings. But more importantly was that after spending that money, we would still have an inadequate hospital with no room for expansion. So I guess in order to be able to overcome those obstacles, the government now has realized that they're going to have to spend $200 million on basically redoing the building. Now the question is, why would you do that? You have a brand new building that's sitting there, that's 20% larger than OKEU. To just operationalize the ground floor, 110,000 square feet, in an open space area would cost $50 million. And all the designs and the layouts were done by the Naraya, the company from India that was providing consultancy work for us. Plus about $1 million or $1.5 million it was going to cost to help transition the staff from the stadium into this new facility. And you would have now had the ability to continue to grow those facilities and move into the upstairs part. So the idea was to have an emergency ward, proper MRIs and X-ray machines, and a lab that both your local hospital and your international hospital would be able to share. So you'd get greater utilization of those very expensive assets. Why would you go and spend that kind of money? And then not even to be able to tell us at the end of the day, after you spend that money, what are you going to get? How many bedrooms? I mean, how many rooms are you going to get? Beds are you going to get? What's the opportunity to expand that facility? So again, Shannon, I want to make this very clear that the first year and a half was understanding what the evidence was as to the decision we would make at St. Jude's. When it became very clear that the amount of money to fix up the old facility was inadequate, you then looked at it and you stepped back for a moment and you said to yourself, what does a modern hospital look like? And when we say it's a box in the sense that all of your facilities are under one roof. That's what the box means. Box doesn't mean that it's a box. And so if you look at all the hospitals around the world, all of the facilities are ground floor, first floor, second floor, elevator, but all in the same space. You don't leave a building and walk outside to go to another building. So the only two buildings that were outside in this particular regime was the dialysis and the rehab. And the question is why? Is because both rehab and dialysis are also outpatient services. What do we mean by that? There are persons who are not currently in the hospital who are using the dialysis labs on a regular basis, and there are also persons that are using the rehab. So it means that you wouldn't; those persons can come in and it wouldn't interfere with your other operations in your hospital. Okay, so those are the only two ones in which there was a walkway, a covered walkway that you would go to from the hospital. But all the other services are under one cover. And then when we look back and we said, okay, how do we best utilize the investment that's been made in the old building so far? It looks like a university. And what we said is that the investments in medical universities in this region have been incredibly successful. St. Lucia has, I think, a very good reputation globally for our nurses. So putting a nursing university there would have been ideal. No other medical school in the Caribbean is in that kind of proximity and would have had that kind of operating relationship with the hospital, meaning the nurses are immediately getting practical support. The hospital is benefiting from all of these interns, so it's extra hands on. So it becomes a win-win situation. So it wasn't about demolishing the building, but it was about integrating the building into a medical complex. I've not heard that kind of strategy from the government. The government almost wants to be one-upmanship, to justify the claims that they've made, but they've already failed. $10 million and some Clorox would solve the problem, if you remember. Go paint it and clean it up. Well, you've had 2.5 years. You've spent $10 million, but you spent $10 million on cleaning the place and hoarding it. Nothing else. And even after you cleaned it, the mold has come back.
And some of the fencing are already compromised.
Yeah, well, look, and if you're going to spend, and now it's going to require $200 million. So imagine if it was just $50 million. To me, the $50 million should have come from the CIP funds to have finished off the hospital, and the Saudi Arabian loan should have been used for some one of those assets that I've spoken about. So again, we talked about HIA Airport. HIA Airport was tripling the size of the current airport. Why was that important? That's sending a signal to everybody, all your investors, that Lucia is serious about tourism, that we want to see our tourism plant expand. We want to see us to achieve international standards, getting a pre-clearance facility. And even I'm just lost when the Prime Minister said that he didn't know that an airport could be on 2 floors, and therefore the ramp. What is the ramp? The ramp is that downstairs is arrival. So when you go to pick up your loved one, or they're picking up the tourist, it's all on the ground floor. And if you're going to be dropping somebody off, you drop them up on the top ramp. Now, if you're going to be tripling the size of the airport, therefore you have to know that there's more traffic coming in, and you have to put a traffic management system in place to facilitate it. The airport's no different than anywhere else in the world. And you see what has been successful at other places in the world. So to go and fool the people and say, well, we're going to go and spend, I think it's $30 million to cap the piles and take out the ramp. It's just, it's really regressive. And I think it's an insult to the intelligence of the people of this country.
And it's the same ramp, Mr. Shah, that the Prime Minister uses when he goes to Gatwick. Is the same ramp that he uses when he goes
Miami.
to JFK and everywhere around the world.
Correct. I'm saying to you, it's proven technology. It's not about we're experimenting. Best practice. That's what that's called. So it's very, very sad to see what's taking place both at HIA and at St. Jude's. But even more importantly, Shannon, it's very sad to see that the vision of growing the South has been lost on this government, and yet they continue to enjoy the support of the public. I'm sorry, I do not buy into the idea that because we want to raise the standards of Newport, some people say we wanted to make it Miami. Everybody's traveling to Miami. The world wants to go to Miami. Why wouldn't we want to build a St. Lucian version of Miami? And I cannot believe that people would not want to vote for that. And that's why I'm saying to you that it's important that as a political party, we recognize that as good as we think our ideas were, as strong as the evidence is to support the policies of United Workers' Party, we have to do a much better job of getting people to appreciate and understand what is it we're doing. And we have to also sit back and say to ourselves, maybe how we convey those messages is rubbing some people the wrong way. For that, I apologize, because we have to take responsibility for what has happened here in St. Lucia, that we have a government that's failing all of us, not just citizens. I am a citizen of St. Lucia. I have investments in St. Lucia. My family has investments in St. Lucia. My friends have investments in St. Lucia. There are a lot of people who are good friends of mine who depend on the outcome of the economy of St. Lucia, and we're all suffering collectively.
Yeah. Quick answer on St. Jude. would it be fair for the citizens to demand clarity from the finance minister and prime minister on that Saudi loan? Duration of the loan, exact amount of interest that's been paid, duration on the project, who's going to do the project, are the Saudi bringing in contractors, is there a clause? Do we need clarity, and should the citizens be demanding this at this particular time?
Well, yeah, and look, it's eventually going to come out because they have to come to Parliament. But let's also understand that given that they have a substantial majority in the House, and there is a fair amount of bias that's taking place in the House, they are required to come to the House. I will attempt, and Bradley will attempt, to make sure that they provide that level of clarity. They just have a way of just washing over these things and moving on, given the majority that they have in the country. You made reference to the comments that I made about contracts. Mm-hmm. And look, it's a very important thing. I said in Parliament when we were discussing the DSH issue, the DSH, what we had was a framework agreement, if you remember. The framework agreement is very similar to when you go to planning to get approval in principle. So let's say you have a piece of land that is zoned to be agriculture or zoned to be residential, and you want to put a commercial property there. You can go to planning and make an application, and planning will say to you, yes, in principle, we will approve that. But that's subject to you providing all the level of details. So I want to make it clear that when you sign an MOU, when you have a pre-approval process, there's a certain level of confidentiality that I get. A major company investing in St. Lucia would not want competitors to know that it's coming to St. Lucia. I also then said that once that contract was completed, we would make that public. So my comments on Timothy Pollion's show were to say that I've now learned that actually we're going to legislate that. And the piece of legislation that is out there that makes that happen is called the Public Information Act. So it basically puts in an act the requirements of government to make and disclose all of the contracts that it signs. And I think that would include contracts with consultants, contracts with contractors, and contracts with investors. I think there's more to lose by not doing it and allowing people to continue to question, and because of the cynicism, and maybe rightfully so, that people have towards politicians and its own government, that this is a way of trying to bridge that gap. So that is something that we absolutely would do, is to pass a Public Information Act that would create a singular source for the media and the general public to have access to contracts that the government signs.
I'm very happy that you've gone beyond just the rhetoric and you've actually researched the legislation in preparation for that. What else would you do differently if and when next voted in as Prime Minister?
To understand that an opposition's job is to oppose. And you have to make the assumption that the criticisms that they're bringing up sometimes are the voices of the persons who don't want to speak for themselves. And as disingenuous as some of it may be, we have to deal with all of them in a very serious way. We have to, as a government, continue to have a better relationship with our citizens, and to really live up to the relationship between the Constitution and government. That we are there to serve the people. And the hoarding of information or the prevention of information, NTN is a very good example, Shanon, has to become much more robust than it currently is. so that persons know that there is a source of information coming from its government. That when persons say things that are not necessarily true, we have to do a better job of debunking those things on more immediately. I have often publicly criticized civil society. I think that one of the problems that civil society has is the amount of resources that it pledges towards research. So I had spoken about creating a tax, and that tax would go directly to those civil organizations, so that they can do a better job of researching information and becoming another voice in the system. I'd also contemplated creating a productivity council. And what do I mean by that? Nobody trusts the information that's out there. What's that objective source that's out there? And so it takes resources. You need lawyers, you need psychologists, you need sociologists, you need economists, reviewing all the things that government is doing and giving an objective assessment, a report card that people can trust. And at least it starts the basis of the conversation. I think that that's very important. I think that the checks and balances that the Constitution put in place, Public Service Commission, the government has turned around and appointed a chairman of the Public Service Commission, is the same chairman every time they come into office that they put there, right? This is a very important institution that is responsible for the hiring and transferring, and also the regulation of our civil service. So should there be an independent tribunal that when you have a complaint as a citizen towards a ministry, a department, or an individual, that there's a place you can go and report in which it's processed and heard much quicker than the court system can. So it almost becomes the first hurdle that you can go to. I think the digitization of government needs to move at a much faster pace. What's going on at the passport department is just absurd. The complaints I'm hearing about people getting their driver's license, and the complaints I'm hearing about people getting their ID, and how important those documents are in your everyday to day life, is too long. And the technology clearly is there for it to happen. I mean, why can't you have a digital ID? Why can't you have a digital passport if it's just for internal use? And if you're going to travel, then you would have the actual document. But we should even be getting those hard copies of those documents. So how people interact with the civil service was a big part of what we were doing. I don't think we were moving fast enough. Sir Arthur Lewis, we were in the process of dividing Sir Arthur Lewis into what it's currently doing, narrowing the numbers of disciplines that it was going to teach so it could do it better, but also to create a public service training institution. Government itself is going to be going through a significant transformation. A lot of the jobs that exist today are not going to exist, and we can't wait for that to happen. Let's start telling people, what is the architecture of government going to look like? What are the jobs that are going to be available? What are the skill sets that are going to be necessary? And take some of the teachers from Sir Arthur Lewis, create a public service training institute that stays in place all the time. And even in terms of dealing with services, there is not enough training that's taking place in the public service. The encouragement and the framework to allow small businesses to grow, I think we absolutely were on the right track with village tourism. Whether you want to call it village tourism or community tourism. I hear the minister talking about that we didn't build any new rooms. Well, in Ancillary, there's 12 new rooms that were built, and he's refused to open them. Yet he speaks about how great village tourism was from that concept. So this is only rhetoric, but I can say to you that there are many things that we were doing that we would continue. We are starting the process to go community by community, to go through some of those things, identify and maybe say things differently, plan things differently, add some new things. And as we bring in our new candidate, we are also simultaneously working on our policy as a party. And I want to assure the public of St. Lucia that we've not sat here and believed that we are ordained to be in government, that we have to be in government. We know that this is something that we have to continue, is to earn the trust of the St. Lucians. In the fray of things, maybe you say things incorrectly. but I want to reassure everybody, I don't think that I said anything out of malice, and it always came from a place. But we have to do a much better job of convincing everybody that that's actually the case.
It appears that you have learned and you've reflected, so that is good. I want to thank you this morning for coming on. The next time you must come in studio, and we must allot some time for our callers, because I'm getting a lot of stick that we didn't allot time for some calls. So I want to thank you for coming on, former Prime Minister. We'll talk again next time, but thanks for your time this morning.
Great, and my prayers continue to go out to all Saint-Lucians.
Excellent. Alan Chastanet, my very special guest this hour. He's also the Member of Parliament for Miku South and the leader of the opposition. Insightful discourse will remain on the online platform, so you can access it in its entirety at a later time. But I want to thank you for coming on and joining us from Sunrise. We'll be back tomorrow. Join the news team at 6:45. They will have additional information on that homicide which occurred earlier on this morning at Lakwamengo, Basse Joseph. So join the news team, Daniela Edwin and Kareem, just the entire team, Quinn and the entire team under the stewardship of Sherry Ann Gillard Williams will be on your first news of the night, 6:45, and they'll give you the details on that. God willing, I'll be back tomorrow at sunrise, where we connect again. On behalf of the entire team, thanks so much for joining us. Bye-bye for now.